2018 at 6:03 p.m.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay.
Continued. Opening the hearing, 6:03 for Templar Holdings LLC, 9 Tulip Shell Way. This is for proposed dock modifications and addition of a boat lift. At the request of the applicant, this was continued from 10/12, 10/26, 11/9, and December 14th to address harbor master and shellfish constable concerns and to submit revised plans, which have not been received. This is an NOI.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Matt Costa, Cape and Islands Engineering. Just a point of clarification, you should have revised plans for January 9th. You look on your cover sheet, right on the title cover sheet, on the right side, in the title draft.
What was that, Matt, again? I couldn't see.
January 9th.
Yep, that's in the revision, yep.
August time?
Yeah. So, we're here tonight before you under a notice of intent application at 9 Tulip Shell Way to rebuild a portion of the existing dock, reconfigure some floats, existing floats, install a boat lift. Drew's got the property pulled up on the screen here to see the GIS information located right next to Little River Boatyard on Little River. Flip to the next one. So this is the existing conditions plan. That is sheet 3 of your set. That shows what's on the ground right now. You can see up on this projector over here, we got the existing dwelling, the existing ramp, pier leading down to a fixed T ramp and then float configuration out here. So here's the total dock as it exists today. This dock did have an interim approval a few years ago. These interim approvals expire after 1 year, 1 year after property transfer, if the new property owner doesn't apply for Chapter 91 license. Long story short, it's expired. So if you can flip to the next one, we're proposing to do some alterations to this dock and apply for a new Chapter 91 license. Your resource areas for the project include land under the ocean and land containing shellfish, salt marsh, narrow BVW, and land subject to coastal storm flowage. What we're proposing is to extend the fixed pier up to the lawn area, because right now there is a path that people use to access the pier that starts from the edge of the lawn area, comes down to the fixed pier. And by doing that, they're actually walking through a small portion of wetland. So we're going to modify all of the existing decking, rebuild that decking, and extend that to the lawn area. We're going to be adding access stairs near the mean high water mark for public access, because the pier is not elevated 5 feet above the ground at that point. We're going to keep the existing configuration right now where it's fixed T. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the existing float, we're actually going to push it out a little bit further, about 4 feet out further than what's there now. So we got the 2 existing floats that are tied together. Both of those are going to get pushed out further. We're going to get rid of the existing ramp and put a new ramp over on the northern side of that fixed T. We're going to relocate one of the piles over here, and then we're going to add 3 new piles for the installation of the boat lift. If you look in your plan set, I have a detail of the boat lift that's on sheet 6 of 7. To give you an idea of what this looks like, that's the manufacturer's cut sheet. It shows you the configuration. What it is, it's 4 electric motors essentially mounted to 4 pilings that are connected to cross beams, and then those cross beams are connected with bunks that will be lowered into the water. The boat pulls into the space, and then it gets picked up out of the water. The reason for having a boat lift like this is to obviously keep the boat stored out of the water, and it also, more importantly, allows the boat owner to operate the boat without the need to apply bottom paints to it. This does have some positive environmental benefits to it by way of keeping the boat elevated up out of the water. It allows more access to the shellfish area and reduces any possible leachates from the bottom paints. We did go through a lengthy process with the Shellfish Constable and Harbor Master. We looked at this in many different ways, I think probably every way possible. We did talk to Drew about it ahead of time. We ended up with this final configuration because all parties involved believed it was the best configuration to both help protect shellfish, and more importantly, the shellfish habitat, and not pose a problem for navigation. The project does meet all the applicable performance standards, which we have articulated in our narrative, and we respectfully request you issue an order of conditions. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So I understand that the negotiations included some proposed conditions as to how the boat lift would be
Yeah,
operated.
exactly. So I can elaborate on that a little bit before Drew jumps in. But what we talked about with Rick York is we have the ability to do hydrographic surveys at really intense levels of detail. So we're going to detail out the area in 1-foot intervals. So we will build an existing base map that will be used as a condition for the permit. We'll be required to build this base map to use it as a reference. So that on an annual basis, we'll go back, we're going to resurvey the area with the same standards so that we can compare the bottom topography and see if there's any changes. Rick was concerned about the possibility of having the bottom altered due to the boat accessing this boat lift, and they seem to think that it would require a certain amount of thrust to get on. It doesn't really work like that. You want to pull it into the spot and you lift it up. You don't want to drive up on it like you were loading a trailer because you break everything. So we agreed to this condition ahead of time so that we would build that base map, come back on an annual basis for a couple of years to resurvey on the same level of detail so that we can prove to him that demonstrate what those changes are on the bottom, and then address those accordingly. And we also have, I'm not sure, I haven't seen the language that Drew's going to work on conditions that revolve around, if there is a problem, then we would need to address that problem.
Could you show the dock diagram again? For Drew?
The proposed.
So this is the proposed. So this is where the new ramp's going, and we're pushing this float out about 4 feet further from where it is. Same with this float, we're pushing it out about 4 feet further from where it is. And then we're putting pile, and then those piles get tied together. Not really tied together. If you look at the diagram, there's the electric motors on the piles with cables that run down to the beams. So they support the beams. But then on those cross beams, there's bunks that run perpendicular to each beam, and that's what picks up the boat. So that's really the boat lift.
So that rectangle is the outline of the boat lift.
Yes, right here.
And is this a commercially proven design?
Yes, he used the same and same boat lift in Florida.
The reason I ask is I actually used to work for, or to advise a company that was in the boat lifting business, much larger than something like this. But they were a problem. I mean, it's a complicated piece of machinery, keeping the motors running properly and with the electrical control system. It's not, I'm surprised that a piece of equipment like that is going here just to avoid putting bottom payment on a boat.
The applicant did research it fully. We even explored floating lifts, if you've ever seen those, that sit in the water and then use, they'll change buoyancy and they'll sink down and your pumps pump out water and literally float the boat back up. I looked at a lot of different scenarios, but this was the best and it was proven. More importantly, proven to him because he has used it before, and it is a very reputable company. But you're right. I mean, electronics and salt water are a tough thing to put together, but this does work.
Yeah. And is the objective of this new project, the new docking area, is that to run a commercial business or to increase?
Absolutely not. This is just for private use only. The way it's going to work is that he would use the main portion of the dock right here for his pulling in quickly and stopping, docking, and then the storage would be done on the lift over here.
All right.
So, because we have to take care to make sure that tides and winds, and it's not easy getting that in that perpendicular to the current and the predominant wind direction. So there will be times he'll have to just pull up and dock right here and wait for appropriate times to load it on the lift. But this is for private use only.
Okay.
Matt, do the beams, how far down do they go? I know you have to get them underwater, but how deep below the water? If you got are you going to be loading at mid and high tide, or are you going to be loading at low tide?
It's going to be near high tide, about a 2 hour before, 2 hour after window in the high tide area. The beam gets lowered down. It'll be a couple inches off the bottom. It's a 10-inch beam.
Okay.
But
So I mean low
does
water.
It does not touch the bottom.
Okay, and everything. How much does, what size boat is it, and what does it draw? Do you know?
The boat draws 18 to 20 inches, depending on the load, how much fuel, how many people. 18 to 22 inches, depending on the load. And I should know the boat length.
32
feet. 32?
So yeah, because your lift is only 13 and a half, 14 feet.
Yeah, it's 16 feet wide. That lift is if you look in their cut sheet, they categorize them so it can handle a lot of different sizes. It's not
So,
specifically designed for 32 feet, say.
all right, so he's going to have, if he's somewhat centered on the boat, he's going to have 8 feet sticking out each end, right, with the bow. So you got 1.3 feet
It will be
in front of it.
with the motors and everything. Yeah, you're right. Approximately 8 or so feet will be sticking out, which is we did talk about it. It's about the same as an 8-foot, a boat with an 8-foot beam being docked at the end.
Right. So if he tries to get in a low tide, he's got 1.3 feet, probably 6 feet in front of it, and he's got 2 feet of
Yeah, he's
low
not
water.
going to be going in
At low tide, he won't be able to do it then, right?
Not safely, and they don't want to be damaging equipment because you don't want to treat it like a trailer. You don't want to drive up on it. That way,
Right.
you'll.
So yeah,
you'll ruin it.
you're going to have that beam well below
You wanna
the
float
water
over
level
and get picked up.
picked up. Okay. All right. Yeah, because you got 3 feet at mean low water out behind. So if you're drawing 18 to 20, and that prop's going to be in the mud at low tide there. Yeah. Okay.
Matt, looking at this, I looked at the entire structure, the existing structure, now the add-on structure, it appears as if it encroaches on the neighbor to the south. They don't follow the property line down the southerly perimeter.
Well, the existing pier with relation to the southern property line is in the same spot as it exist today. So it doesn't really encroach because it's not going over a property line. Property line's stopping at mean high water where they're being projected down the mean low water, and that's your intertidal area where the public does have
And
rights.
this is not
and that's-
truly a river, so you don't get into
Yeah, so
riparian.
that's where your littoral rights are, and long story short, we're very confident DEP will be okay with where it is now. And furthermore, we plan on getting, the DEP likes to see you get a letter of consent from the butter when you're less than 25 feet. And we are friends, the applicant's friends with the butters, so anticipate that being no issue.
Are there other comparable size boatless in use on the Cape?
That's a great question. I'm not 100% sure. I don't know what other boat, where this has been used elsewhere on the Cape. We did look at the floating lift that it was in the water body along waterway there. There's one over off the waterway.
Papaneset Creek.
Yeah,
Oh,
Papaneset
right.
Creek. But I don't know if this boat lift's used anywhere else on the Cape.
There are a number of boat lifts on John's Pond. I don't think any of them are that big, but they're lifting 20, 25-foot boats certainly. I've never, never heard of or seen of any sign of them having any difficulties with it. It's pretty well proven technology. The main concern that I think we would have is simply what you have mentioned, the potential for disturbing the shellfish beds in nearby environment, like scouring bottom. So if I understand the proposal correctly, you have a firm belief that that will not occur, firm enough, so that you're willing to risk the possibility of us requiring that you remove that lift in 2 or 3 years from now if in fact there is disturbance involved. Is that correct?
That is correct. We believe you could adequately dock that boat on there and do so with no more thrust difference than would be used to maneuver around and dock at the end of the pier.
I'm sure you understand that, the commission doesn't want to be in a position of taking draconian measures later. We'd rather not
Nobody
see
wants
you
to be in that
put
position.
yourselves into that position, and then us have to enforce the consequences.
This is a very involved applicant. He's done a tremendous amount of research on this. He met with us all together at the meetings. He fully understands what is being proposed.
What would your take on this, Drew?
Well, I did just have a couple of questions. The portion of the plan for the existing pier, where it's the existing 4x39-foot pier to be maintained, decking to be rebuilt. This is the section of pier that goes over the majority of salt marsh. What kind of decking is that going to be? Is that
True
gonna be-
flow?
Okay, good. And I'm assuming that the boat lift structure itself, I don't know what his plans are for the floats, but is the, and you may not know the answer, is he planning on leaving the floats in with a bubbler?
The floats stay in now.
So they're, so they're
Yeah,
not
so
planning on being
there's
removed,
no material change
so. Okay.
with the floats. We do have the through flow called out on the pier detail.
Where
The
is it?
motor actually sits above the water line.
Okay.
I'm sorry?
The motors are above the water, not in the water.
Oh, right, yes, the motors in the lift, yes.
Where was, oh, there it is, okay, through flow decking, sorry, the cross-section. The letter from Marine Fisheries obviously addresses the previous plan, because it's an October letter, so you may want to submit a revised plan to them, because there is in regard to float stops, because the floats were pushed out since, I think, the.
Yeah, they're actually in deeper water.
So they're in
now,
deeper water, so it's not really relevant anymore. You may just want to send them an updated plan so that
Right.
their records are up to date as far as what their comments are, because they're not really relevant to this change. As Matt already stated, there was a lot of back and forth with the shellfish and Natural Resources, Rick York, over the design. Shellfish Constable, just to read his comments for the record, is Brian Everett. The proposed revision to the dock shown on plan dated January 9th, 2018 would be an improvement over the previously licensed plan, except for the possibility of prop dredging from thrust needed to maneuver the boat to the lift, but that's been clarified. Thrust would not be needed. A pre-construction map of depth contours at 1-foot intervals could be used for reference to determine alteration of the bottom from use of the lift, which Matt already described was going to be forthcoming. This is an area of highly productive shellfish habitat. Alteration of bottom could negatively affect shellfish productivity. So what we had discussed is that if the commission were to approve this project, I would sit down with Brian and craft conditions specific to preventing or in the event that there was any adverse impact to land-containing shellfish, that there would be appropriate mitigative action to restore that area, and also that the commission would reserve the right to require additional measures, including possible removal of the boat lift if the damage to shellfish habitat became systemic. So those are my comments.
Just a point of clarification, the existing map that's going to be built is not going to show contours in 1-foot intervals. It's going to show soundings in 1-foot
Right,
intervals. So there'll be
soundings.
literally a shot every foot.
Center grid.
Right.
Are there any comments from the audience? You have additional questions from the commission?
No,
That's fine.
good.
Can a motion then?
I would move that we close an issue in regards to the application of Templar Holdings LLC, 9 Tulip Shell Way.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 And I'm sorry, I should have asked, I assume this includes the conditions that we just discussed.
Absolutely.
All agree?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Opening the 606 hearing, Donna Beckett Levenwald, sorry if that's mispronounced, trustee, 161 Timber Lane Drive. This is for the proposed construction of a single-family home, garage, septic system upgrade, landscaping, hardscaping. At the request of the commission, this was continued from 12/24 for the submission of revised plans, which have now been received. I believe there was a note from the owner. Yes, I found it somewhat difficult to read the longhand.
There was a letter, there is a letter from the property owner that she had submitted. It's just writing is in cursive, it's very difficult to read throughout from beginning to end, but we can attempt to read it for the record. It's just difficult in some areas, so. But I think it would be best to have you present Jack first, and then we can look at the letter. Yeah, so please continue.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Jack Landers Collier. I'm a civil engineer in private practice, and I've been retained to do the surveying and engineering and permitting for the property that's before you this evening. We have to do a little homework first and give you plans that have been submitted to the board, but I want to make certain you have full-size plans of the planting scheme. So here are 3 sets that you can review during the presentation. I think the place to begin is by taking a couple steps back and talk to you about what happened at the last meeting.
That's good, because Steve Cook wasn't here at the last meeting, so that would be good to refresher.
This lot, or 161 Timber Lane, is a vacant lot. It's about 15,000 square feet in size, and it is owned by the individual who sent you that letter. And I think it's fair to say that the context of the letter, when you read it, will be that she owns the property. She bought the property a number of years ago, and she anticipated selling it in her latter years to basically finance her retirement. And she hopes that this board sees fit to approve the project. Having said that, Tom Smith has entered into an agreement that if the project is approved, he will purchase it. That's the short side of the long story. What I think is unique about this property is the number of regulations that come into play. And I'm repeating myself for the benefit of Steve. We have a lot that is as wide as it is deep. We have a lot that slopes from the road to Santuit Pond, and as a definitive bank based on the state regulations down here is unique in terms of the Wetlands Protection Act, in that we have a local bylaw that defines the top of the bank for an inland wetland area, basically starting here and then heading down. I bring that to your attention because that triggers a host of mitigation requirements should we get approval to build this lot. Now, at the last meeting, we did not have a mitigation plan. I knew we were going that direction. I actually encouraged the client to get a mitigation plan prior to the other meeting. It didn't happen. After the meeting, we met again, and it was determined, yeah, we'll have a mitigation plan for the next meeting. And I can tell you right now, even with that mitigation plan, which I think is a comprehensive plan, and I haven't spoke to Drew about it, but I think there's a great deal of detail. It makes a lot of sense, and should this project be approved, I think it will actually be a benefit to the community, that is the local community, in that if done correctly, will be attractive and have some of the values of indigenous planting. Now, what has changed since the last meeting? Because of the input by the board, we chose to do several things. The first is we removed the leaching pit that was over here, because what we're going to do is we're going to contain all additional surface water runoff from the driveway, from the house, into a leaching pit here, and there was a leaching pit there. Because we're trying to compress this project and have a smaller impact on footprint, we took that leaching pit, which was located in this area, and instead we substituted a leaching trench directly below the proposed deck. The reasoning being, the area below the deck will not really encourage plant growth. Secondly, it's going to be an access out of the basement to the outside, and it would be counterproductive. So putting a leaching trench there makes a lot of sense. The second thing is we proposed to put sonotubes in here and cantilever the deck. That permitted us to compress the limit of work. We actually gained another 8 to 10 feet over here. In fact, what is shown cross-hatched in green is the net gain from the last plan. Our limit of work started here, came down, went around like that, came over to here. We have since moved the limit of work to here, went right by the deck, we removed this pit and came up here. The result of that is a net gain of about 800 square feet. Having said that, we actually had a reduction though, because, and this is a change in the plan, we proposed a 3-foot wide footpath here. which would be a loss of about 120 square feet. So we don't get the full benefit of this gain. It's this gain less 120 square feet. At the end of the proposed walkway is going to be a platform. Now, if you look at the plan, it says that the walkway is going to avoid the loss of any trees. What we did have Mr. Smith do is go out, stake the path as where it's going with the specific intent that he not have to cut down any mature overstory. So even though we show it straight, it's going to be a little serpentine just to get around the trees. It's our intent not to cut any trees in order to get from the top of the bank to the bottom of the bank. That's not to say seedlings won't be cut, some of the understory won't be cut down, but no mature trees are proposed to be cut for that footpath. Those are the things we have done since the last meeting. We have also, in order to understand the mitigation consequences, is the designer showed, as this board knows, the further you are from a resource area, the different the mitigation requirements are. So what they've done is they've actually broke it down in increments of 5 feet to show the relative impact. The bottom line is this: we would need about 13,000 square feet to mitigate under your regulations. Can't do it. Simply can't do it. We would like the board to, in this particular case, waive that requirement. Otherwise, there's no practical way to develop the lot. Now, having
So
said
why
that,
is that? Why is that?
well, there's no way we can, on
No.
this lot,
But
mitigate.
you're saying that there would be a very large mitigation requirement per the regulations.
That is correct.
Just in a few words, how is it that that's the case and not the case for the numerous houses that are developed here every week?
Well, it's because the entire lot is subject to your mitigation requirement. So whether you built a 1,200 square foot house or a 100 square foot house, your mitigation ratios are such that you might need a 3-to-1 or a 2-to-1 or a 2.5-to-1 ratio. So let's just say, for purposes of conversation, this was 1,000 square feet. We would need 2,500 square feet of non-indigenous planted area. Now, if this lot, let's say this lot was all lawn here, I think your regulation would permit us to develop this lot, plant the rest with indigenous plants, because we're not altering natural habitat. This whole site is natural habitat. And the way I've interpreted your regulation, natural habitat, you can't remove natural habitat and then replant it and call it mitigation. It has to be altered habitat or altered area, driveway, lawn, existing buildings. It's a vacant lot. And because it's a vacant lot, it has a different set of standards. Let me take one step back, again, for the benefit of Steve. In order to get this project before you, we also have to go to the Board of Health. The Board of Health is required, because we asked for some, what I consider minor variations in the Title V design. One being getting a variance from the street side. The other is getting a variance from the separation between the wetlands and the SAS of approximately 4.8 feet. So, as mitigation, the board asks us to provide IA technology, innovative and alternative technology, which the applicant has proposed on this plan. In addition to that, we would have liked to move it further to the road, but the Board of Health, by virtue of the geometry of the lot, it's a balancing act. We have to choose which variance we're going to apply for, which relief we're going to seek from which department. Because after your department, he still has to go to the ZBA or get a ruling from the building commissioner that he has to go to the ZBA, because you also have a zoning bylaw that says a structure can't be within 50 feet of a wetland. Well, the way they interpret it, that 50 feet would be this wetland down here, not your coastal bank. We are now 50.5 feet, so we meet that part of the regulation. However, we're gonna have to get relief from the front yard. So there's a lot of moving parts to this. The bottom line is we were very aggressive. I stated at my last meeting, if the pond wasn't there, this is a typical blue-collar home. It's modest in size, it's a one-car garage, it's 24 feet wide, 38 feet long. Because it's on a slope, we think it's an absolute necessity to have a deck. Because quite frankly, if you weren't on your deck enjoying the view, you'd be on the ground. So actually, I think it probably makes more sense to have the deck. A lot of thought's gone into this project. So, with the exception of the mitigation, I think that is the additional mitigation, because we're mitigating any area that gets altered. And if you take a look at that plan, I think you'll see we're planting 3 feet on center. I think we're looking at, it's hard to believe, 944 plants to be placed on that. That's an incredible number of plants. I don't think there's any more we can do than that. If you have any questions, be happy to answer.
A small one, just on the drawing, it shows an edge of pavement. So is this, the right-of-way is wider than the pavement, or what's going on
Here,
here?
so you're just gonna leave this in a natural state here, the 15, 20 feet from property line to the edge of pavement? Just gonna leave that natural state?
There's no reason to change it. That is the road layout, that's not part of the lot. If you're saying to me the difference between approving and denying this project is put indigenous plants up there, I would certainly consider it, but again, going back, we don't want to remove mature trees.
I'm just
We
trying to
can't get a
understand,
credit unless it's been altered.
I'm trying to make sure I understand where the edge of the lot is. Is it, I mean, this is the edge of the lot.
Right.
So what is the space between there and this is just,
That's
it's the
road
right-of-way
layout.
for
That's the road layout.
It's all wooded right now.
Just
I see.
wooded, naturally
That's correct.
wooded.
Yeah.
Will
It's
that
a-
remain wooded?
I'm sorry, what?
Will that remain wooded?
Well,
Or is
we
it-
don't show any
or is the
grading.
contractor gonna cut those trees to get in that?
They're gonna, well, here's your driveway entrance. This is all gonna be excavated, Steve. We don't show grading changes here, but realistically, you'll probably see a little bit of a grade change here. There's no reason why any of the overstory should be removed here. Here we're gonna show the water line, so there will be some loss of trees here. That's typical of any house.
Sure.
You know, there's usually a 10-foot distance from the edge of your property line to the edge of the paved surface.
Do you happen to know when this lot was subdivided?
I think 1978. So it predates,
So this belongs.
Many
to
of
the
your-
other on one side of the other.
it predates many of your zoning, present-day zoning bylaws. And normally, situations like this, I'm gonna turn the clock back 25 years when I first started working on the Cape. I had a husband and wife, they were a teacher. They come to me, they wanna develop the property. We tell them there's a wetlands in the backyard, you can't use half the lot. And the wife starts crying. And they say, okay, we're close to retiring, we wanted to build here, what happened? I said, your only sin, or your only problem is, you should have built when you bought the lot. You should have built before the zoning changed, before the Wetlands Protection Act changed. So if you read that letter, that woman will probably be saying, I bought this a whole long time ago. I planned on retiring, I planned on selling it. And now, the bylaws have changed. You know, everyone sitting in the audience and at this table get it. The regulations change regularly. A lot of people
understand regulations are changing. They just don't understand how it affects them. So here's a case where her only problem was she should have sold it a long time ago before the regulations changed.
Did you have an opportunity to talk with Drew about possibilities for unusual mitigation plan?
I did not. I wanted to see how the board embraced this concept, because otherwise I think it would have been a waste of his time and mine.
Right, and I believe I said at the last meeting that I needed to confer with town council, and I have not had an opportunity to do that, so that's really not at play here, any sort of alternative mitigation. It's basically what you see before you now. I don't have any other suggestions. To bring that into the scenario will require a significant amount of time. It may even require adjusting our regulations to reflect something like that, alternative mitigation, because there's nothing in the regulations that allows for off-site mitigation or alternative mitigation. There was the one instance I know that we did the donation to the Shellfish account that was approved by, that was run by town council, and he said there was no problem with it, but we don't have anything that's reflected in the regulations to use that again. And this is an entirely different setting. It's got nothing to do with shellfish habitat, so I wouldn't consider that to be a possibility for this, at this time anyway.
So I'm trying to understand, you're telling us that there is not enough land to do the mitigation that would be called for by the regs. And I thought in
That's
your
correct.
narrative,
Well, let me explain it a different way. This is 15,000 square feet. This could be 45,000 square feet, 3 times as long. And if it was entirely wooded, we still couldn't comply to your regulations because we can't cut down indigenous plants and then call it mitigation by planting something else. So how do you deal with it? The way you deal with it is you come to the board and say, we need relief from that particular regulation of your bylaw. That's the only way I can explain it to you. Even if the lot was, well, if it was deeper this way, we would have less mandatory mitigation.
I'm trying to figure out how close are you to being able to meet the numbers for mitigation.
Oh, we're off by a factor of 3.
Your narrative had some specific numbers, but I'm not finding.
It's here, if I may. A waiver request is proposed to address the difference of 682 plantings, which are not possible to plant at the site. 682 is the number. And whatever square footage that equals out to, that's also.
Yeah, multiply it by 9.
And how many plants are being planted?
944.
944.
So 944 plus the 682 would be the requirement.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, how much more cost is that? Percentage?
It's significant. Pretty
Anywhere from
significant.
8 to 10,000, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, for 8 to 10,000 is to be able to have the regulations met.
Well, it's not a question of affordability. It's a lack of space available on the lot to
Yeah, we
accommodate
just
those.
can't put it anywhere.
There's no space to put those 682 plantings. That's why they're requesting the waiver.
Yeah.
There's just no available space. I do have a couple of comments just to, in regards to the waiver request. Just looking at the bylaw section 172-7, which reflects criterion for waiver requests. I think you all know what the specific criterion are, but this one I thought was one that's, particularly germane to this application. Normally, a naturally vegetated buffer strip of 50 feet is considered the minimum. And this is quoting, unless the applicant convinces the commission, as per the section 12 of this chapter 172, that the naturally vegetated buffer strip or part of it may be disturbed and or diminished without harm to the values protected by the chapter, or that reducing the scope of work / alteration is not possible. So, looking at the first one, the NVBS may be disturbed or diminished without harm to the values of this chapter. The values, the performance standards for Inland Bank are, it's protection from storm damage, but you don't really see that very relevant in a situation like this where you're bordering an inland water body. Wildlife habitat is another function of the bank, and groundwater, surface water interaction, runoff channels, drainage patterns, things like that. So when you consider that those are the primary functions of inland bank, the bank itself, which you see delineated on the plan, the inland bank is not being disturbed at all. They have, in my opinion, effective capture of drainage from any impervious surfaces to alleviate any sort of erosion or events that may lead to the destabilization of the bank. Pathway can be conditioned as such that large overstory trees, mature trees, do not get removed, therefore further reducing any sort of instability to the bank. And putting in this sort of planting plan, which if you've read through it, is a very aggressive bunch style mitigation. So you've got a combination of shrubs and grasses to take advantage of that spacing between the shrubs to allow them to grow to maturity without interfering with each other. So those spaces would be filled in with grasses and herbaceous materials. In my opinion, I think that if the commission were to not be satisfied and rule on this based on the lack of mitigation, therefore rendering the lot unbuildable, I wouldn't recommend that, because I think the measures that they've taken, when you look strictly at the performance standards for inland bank, I think those performance standards will be met. I do have a suggestion that our normal 3-year monitoring period for mitigation be extended to 4 years, because it is a very robust mitigation plan. But I think overall that the waiver request is reasonable. Granted, it's a lot of plantings, and I realize that, but I think they're really constrained by the lot size here, and they have made efforts to reduce the footprint where they could.
Well,
And
it could always go to a smaller.
It certainly could go to a smaller house, and that's still,
Smaller driveway.
right.
What about the areas between the wetland and the house that are not shaded and not colored, that are still sloping but not at the rate that the bank is sloping? Why isn't that included in the
I
area?
don't know.
For
Yeah, I don't know.
mediation.
It's
I
like
don't
white,
understand the question.
Well,
So if you
there's
see
a
above
lot
This
of
whole
space
area
here
here.
between the top
The
of the
white
bank and the
space.
home. It's just wide open, uncolored. Why don't you plant in that area?
Because that's already wooded.
But it's gonna be disturbed once you do that wall. You're gonna have to rip open that whole part of the wall. If you're building a whole wall, you're
No,
gonna,
this is
you
a
can,
limit, this is a limit of work.
so this is not a
It's not a
wall.
wall, it's a
Oh.
limit of work that you're looking at. Okay, so the limited work, I think, is extremely reasonable in that, because, again, okay. This is the limit of work.
Need the mic.
That's going to be, if you look at the cross-section, must be on the other page.
Your plan has got
Stake
shading.
fields of, I'm sorry,
Your
what?
plan has shading on it. Outside
This
the limit of
shading
work.
here, it's the area.
that's the area reflected of change, that they reduce the scope, and that's what they're gaining in terms of
Right.
undisturbed.
Yeah, so this is all to remain vegetated. And I think it's realistic, because when you look at it, you see we can build the foundation without disturbing this area.
Well, and Jack, I got a couple questions on that, because if you're doing a sonotubing, it looks like is this a patio that's out underneath this deck? Underneath where these sonotubes are being shown? Is that a flat patio? area?
Crushed stone is what I was thinking.
Right, so if you're walking out, I'm seeing elevation 86 going on to 84, going on, and so that's a 2-foot drop there. So you're saying that over that from the back of the house to the limit of work, that's a 2-foot drop of crushed stone?
That's, 87 is the first floor. 97 is the first floor. This is 87 here.
Yeah,
So
so
I
you're
thought-
87,
I
86,
thought that
going
would
down to
be-
84.
I thought it would be 87 and a half right here.
Right,
So
so,
I see what you're saying, it's
That's pretty-
85.
because this looks like to me as a walkout basement, since we don't have any architectural plans. That area is probably want to be flat underneath that deck.
It would want to be, you're right.
Yeah.
So,
So there would probably be about 15 to 18 inches of fill right here. Yeah.
right, so you're saying that you're gonna need a retaining wall
You're gonna
along
need
that
some
way.
retaining wall.
Actually, Actually,
across
what I
this back of
prob-
this house.
Probably what I would do, Steve, is the 7 feet, I would fill it to that point and just slope it off naturally.
Okay.
Because it'll
So-
be 3-to-1 slope. is what
All
it'll
right,
be.
so, okay, so I'm gonna take this a little bit further. Is I'm looking at some of these grades, and I'm seeing 100 at the street, and I'm seeing the garage floor elevation at 95.5. So this is like 4.5-foot height difference coming down this driveway. I see a turning area that has a 3-foot drop across the turning area.
Yeah.
And then I see the grade sloping down, so I'm looking at all that, and then I see you have dry wells, but, there's no trench drain at the garage, so you're gonna have a lot of stormwater running down that driveway, and then I'm looking at this turn area being sloped. The turn area is not flat, so I don't know how somebody's gonna park a car there on a 3-foot slope.
This is
and-
about an 8 to 9% slope, you're right. Absolutely,
so-
but at the same token, there's a swale that's right here. So our thought was this, that it'd be 95 here and then be sloping at 0.5% down to the basin.
Yeah, so that makes it even steeper, because you're over less distance. So
Oh,
coming
I-
off the street
I know
down
it's
and then the
difficult.
parking area.
I know it's
So,
difficult.
I'm just going from my experience on other projects I've worked on over time. And so that's one issue. The other issue is underneath the deck and what's there. But then this path going down to the pond, you're going from elevation 84 down to 62 at the pond. That's really steep. I think we worked on one, the commission had one on the Shimmer Pond that permitted last year. It wasn't even that steep, and
It's 1.7 to 1.
yeah,
Okay,
it's
if
really
you go-
steep, so, to me, at this point, I'd like to see a cross-section and see, okay, where are all these grades and, how are some of these things being handled? There's no cross-section on this plan.
No, I
So this is
can't,
really
like,
steep, so
provide-
how are you gonna do a path? I know you mentioned meandering around trees, but
I
that's
think
so steep. I don't know how somebody's gonna walk that path.
1.7 to 1 is a little flatter than a set of stairs. Because a set of stairs is.
Well, you're gonna need a set of stairs to walk down there, I don't think, because you're gonna.
Do I think it's a
somebody
good
walking
idea?
down.
Not necessarily, but the applicant wanted to show it. He wanted to tell you what he was going to do. I understand what you're saying. I think you're gonna have to be a healthy person to go up and down this slope.
Yeah, I think you're gonna need to cut in some sort of stairs instead
Even
of
if
having
you
a
had a
path
set
there.
of stairs, even if you had a set of stairs, at that slope, you'd probably have 2 landings, unless you're healthy and you can walk up and down. I mean, my grandkids could do it without a problem.
Just right now, my opinion, without having some cross-sections and a few more details, I'm not gonna support,
Okay.
do a positive vote on this at this point.
Now, in terms of the path, I think that our concern would be to make sure that it was constructed in a way that didn't result in erosion. It's not really up to us to decide whether it's a difficult path to go up and down.
Yeah. I think Steve is right, though. I think we should just give you the cross sections to make you feel comfortable. I get it. I get
Yeah,
what
I'm
he's
not
saying.
gonna try to.
We did
address
put a
the
lot
other
of
part.
thought into this, and it is a difficult site.
Sure.
I mean, we could increase the distance from the first floor to the basement. By doing so, we'll lower the back, and so we don't have that issue. That's something we can present to you. And that doesn't change the grading of the house. What I mean by that is, right now, the first floor is at 97. So we could have a double pour and make it so that the walkout here doesn't cause a drop, or a very, very minor one. I understand what Steve's saying. I'm not sure what we can do with this. I'll have to look at it very carefully.
Yeah,
But you're
the-
looking at a 9% slope, 8, 9, 10% slope. It's steep, I get it. We didn't want to fill though, and the other option is you fill the front yard, make the flat slope flatter. I didn't think that was in the best interest of this project.
And then what the other commissioners mentioned is this area between the actual road layout and the front property line, will that remain wooded? Because the contractor, if not paying attention,
Yeah.
he'll clear cut that whole front of that property to get in there. So, that's another issue that,
Well,
So-
that's, yeah,
because it's actually not their property, it's actually the town.
Yeah, they gotta have the limits
yeah,
clear.
reality is though that you do treat it as your own when you're building. That's the reality. Your mailbox is there, you'll have a sign out there.
Kimberly
You might
Drive,
even have
private road?
landscaping.
Is this a private road or a town road?
I don't know that answer.
Well,
Whether it's a private road or a town road, the development between the edge of the pavement and the house is gonna be the same. Unless it was a state highway,
Yeah, but
which
if
the
it's a
state
private-
has
it's a
state
private
permits.
road, you own to the middle of the road. So therefore, you can play around with that land as if it's your own.
And then it
pretty
needs
much
to be,
settled.
then it
Yeah.
needs to be planted.
Could be,
Yeah.
could be.
You know,
It's
again,
done all over
I-
the place.
again, we have the problem that, do we cut down a tree to put plants, and we don't wanna do that. I think the goal should be, is we should specify that they don't change, they don't remove the overstory here. The only question that Steve brought up that is a particular challenge to me is checking the grades in the driveway.
Yeah,
That's the
that
only
is-
one.
Maybe I'm reacting to the television coverage I've seen based upon the last king tide, but I look at that slope without some kind of a drain around that garage, that water's gonna come down through there. You know, you're talking about an 8-foot drop from the road. And what about the pitch on this road? You know, the water will come down there, turn left, yes, you've got a
No,
berm
no.
in there, but
We
depending upon-
propose a berm here,
Yeah.
because the road drainage should remain the road drainage.
Yeah, but you're only talking
How-
3 inches, that's 3 inches right
Yeah.
there.
True,
Yeah.
true, but that's all you really need to get the water to pass by your driveway.
Right.
As for the, I have to comment, as for the remark about the drainage for the driveway, one leaching catch basin for an area that size is way over designed, way over designed. I can tell you right now, that is not gonna be an issue. In fact, one leaching catch basin, if the lot was shaped differently, would probably serve all the proposed development. Because it's about 7,000 square feet, and one leaching pit in sandy geology can handle 7,000 square feet. Again, getting back, the only concern I have as the engineer is reconciling these grades. I'm pretty sure we'll get it to work. I feel confident about that. Other than that, do you have any other questions?
Steve, is there any part of your concern about the grades of the driveway affect the performance standards that we're responsible for? I understand you're disquiet, it's just that, I'm not sure it's within scope for us to be concerned about how well the driveway works for the opponent.
Well, the runoff.
As long as the runoff is gonna be contained.
As long as it's contained in the upland, it doesn't reach the edge of the bank.
Yeah, I'm not, I don't think there's enough detail in the plan to handle that. I understand that the leaching drain is designed to fit it, but, you know, it seems like there's nothing on this plan to show that the water will be contained, you know, because rainwater can run off a driveway. You got, where that parking area is, you got a 3-foot slope. If it runs across the lawn, you got a storm, it will run across the lawn. How will it be captured in with a curbing, or like a cobblestone curb or something, will channel that water towards that drain? I'm not seeing that right now. That's my concern,
right
is just the
now-
storm water, you know, coming
Right
down
now,
too quick.
it's 30 feet from the property line, which is 98, to the garage, which is at 95.2. So that's 3 feet and 30 or 10% slope.
Then another
Well,
10
look-
feet to the road or so.
And,
right?
yeah, I'm
Right.
just measuring from here.
Right.
And from here, this is fairly stable.
Yeah.
The steepness comes in through here, but I'll take a look at it. It
And-
might
and
mean
then the
that we
path-
change the first floor elevation by a foot to make the driveway flatter. That's
Yeah.
the choice.
And then the path to the pond, now you have a concern over that, where it's like if you're gonna walk down there without, through the underbrush and meander back and forth, you're gonna get erosion there, and that's very steep. And just, that was my concern there. I don't wanna vote for a path and say, yeah, and then have it erode in the future without having some thought to that end of it, you know.
No, generally, people have a right to, to access to the water that's off the edge of their property. We don't normally, act to block that, even though this is an extreme case of slope. I mean, it's not the only property in town, of course, that has a steep bank down to the water on one pond.
Yeah, I mean, my comment when it comes to the pathway is that, that it be constructed in such a way where runoff does not occur, that doesn't adversely affect, it doesn't exacerbate runoff, cause runoff into the pond. So I would like to see more detail. Right now, what's shown on the plan is a straight shot down the hill. That's obviously not going to be what it looks like in reality. So I think the applicant Tom Smith and the property owner need to put some thought into what's gonna happen with an access pathway. Access pathways are absolutely 100% allowed through NVBS under the bylaw. There's no question about that. They have the right to build an access pathway. The thing they need to figure out is the design so that runoff is not an issue.
Right.
And they do need to think about that and come up with some ideas.
I do know Tom doesn't want the project held hostage to the path. So if the path is the issue, if we can't get beyond that, what am I trying to say? If we could possibly get beyond the other issues,
It's not at the
we'll
top of the
stay a
priority
decision
list.
on the pathway,
Right.
just remove it from the plan.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the other side of it is, he does have a P&S, he
Mhm.
does have a timeline,
Right.
and we'd like to have a sense that this project is approvable
Sure.
and it can move forward.
Yeah, no, I understand. Priority
And
wise.
he can always apply at a later date and give it more thought.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think we have to be mindful of the need for meeting the schedule desires of the applicant. But in addition to all the runoff problems that Mr. Cook has brought up, I'm still concerned about why there isn't a smaller project, smaller house, smaller driveway that could be built and meet your requirement.
It may not
And I
necessarily
think
be
you
a
at least
small,
have to give it some analysis.
it may not be a small house, it may be a redesigned house with a smaller footprint.
Mm.
Yeah.
You can always go up and put some of the living space above you and reduce the footprint, which would then allow you to get a lot more mitigation.
This is actually.
So just an architecture.
It's actually a
question.
pretty
Okay.
small house, however. In going up in a very small house, I mean, you lose a lot of square footage as soon as you put in a stairway, landings and so forth.
Yeah, I don't like discussing house size because generally it's a function of what your personal desire is plus economics.
Perhaps-
did refer
perhaps
to
more
this-
fundamentally here,
I,
it wouldn't actually change the situation. There's never gonna be space to put in the mitigation. It's simply.
That's right.
The numbers just aren't there.
That's right. I don't think it's unreasonable. It's 24 feet wide, it's 38 feet long.
It's hard to argue that's a giant
Yeah.
house. But no matter how small it were, if you make that house, the fact is, the entire lot is vegetated. And it's just,
Exactly.
you really can't mitigate.
I think of all the points brought up, Steve brings up the one point that I didn't really give it a whole lot of thought. We did give it some thought, but the 9 to 10% slope is problematic. I mean, it can be done. It is done routinely. In fact, if you lived in New Hampshire, you'd laugh and say, "Oh, that's nothing." Again, I think there's an easy solution. I think we might raise the first floor, just increase the wall height inside the house, pick up the grade. We're already changing all that, and that would have absolutely no impact on the backside of the house.
And just
I
for,
need a strong message, though, from the board today as to whether or not they would, they can overcome the issue about mitigation.
I don't think there's any reason why we shouldn't just briefly discuss that. My own feeling is that Drew has shown us a path by which it's perfectly reasonable for us to approve this project. In terms of the mitigation, I mean, the regulations he read to us give us two things to think about. One is, would the lot in fact be buildable? Is it practical to do more? The answer to that is clearly no. That seems to be a firm basis for a waiver here, given that we have been assured by our staff, and I think it's fairly evident, that the actual performance standards would be met. So I don't have the problem. Brad, what's your sense of this at this point?
I could understand the waiver, but I would like to see some of the other issues corrected.
Sure.
I'm too concerned.
Right, I mean, my original comments were obviously, are dependent on Steve's comments to ensure that when I say that the performance standards are met, that they're not going to be exacerbated by runoff, based on the grade concerns. So that's obviously ties directly into that, to my confidence level in that the bank will be preserved. stability-wise, and drainage patterns won't adversely affect water quality in Santuit Pond. So that information, that further detail would certainly, lend more
Sure.
credibility to my
We can give you
recommendations.
clarity on those issues.
Yeah.
That's really what you're looking for, clarity and how can we do it. Yeah,
Right.
again, I think the objective for us to meet your needs or comfort level is we're gonna end up changing the floor heights. That's what we're gonna do.
Yeah.
I get it, we've done it before.
Yeah, I think,
Pretty
if we
straightforward.
get that info and, yeah,
If
See a
it,
problem.
and if, you then provided perhaps a cross-section as was suggested, so that we can see that in fact you successfully addressed that concern, that would be helpful.
Okay.
yeah.
That's
I have no
no
problem with the mitigation issue at all, it's just the
Yeah,
runoff.
to the mitigation, actually, we're looking a little more biodiversity too, because this is really, I'll call it a monoculture. It's an overstory of trees, basically, with the, and now we're gonna be supplementing it, so you're gonna have more, you'll have plants that are attracting, whether it be bumblebees, butterflies, it'll be a food source, so it complements the environment that's out there.
Well, I just feel, and maybe it's overly being a stickler, but you can't just wave your hands at the mitigation requirement. The fact that there's another, 600 plants that was required to bridge the gap between two other large numbers. So, I mean, it's a big amount of planning, but it's not undoable. $10,000-$15,000, you said, guesstimate, made it on the scale, as part of this project, it would be reasonable. And maybe that's preferable to the owner than doing a new building plan and foundation and everything in a way that's gonna help you on doing it that way.
They are separate issues, but what Steve brought up, I know I can handle. That's a simple detail, at least simple for me. That's not gonna affect any of the mitigation. They're two separate issues.
No, I understand that.
Okay.
And just to point to information that probably has nothing to do with this board, at ZBA last night, the board has changed their position on lots such as this and things like that, is where you don't meet the front setback according to this plan, it's a 40-foot front setback, the applicant will need to get a variance from the ZBA.
I told you, there's a lot of issues here.
Yeah,
There are a
just
lot of issues.
to let you, it's a
Yeah.
point of information because
Yeah.
there was it switched last night at ZBA, so,
So,
from,
um,
so that, just to give you a heads
Well,
up
that's
on
gotta
that.
go to town meeting.
No, it's gotta go to
No, the
ZBA.
zoning board of appeals will need to.
Well, the ZBA has to act, but ultimately it would be heard by,
They'll do it.
No, the board is, it was just a change, just for your information.
Right.
I just wanna, while I have you here, just to let you know that.
How much time would you need, Jack, to revise the plans?
based on what Steve has asked, we can have the next meeting.
We go for continuation to the 25th of January?
You know the time slot?
Another time slot, right around
6:12.
6:12.
Okay, just to be clear, we're gonna give you cross sections. We're not, I'll discuss with my client about the mitigation issue in general. I don't know if this is still gonna be on the table. You'll know a week before then.
For the pathway?
Yeah, we actually located the pathway, but we didn't plot it on there at that time.
No, what I'm asking is, just so you have clarification, once this, the feedback is complete, so you know what to expect next time. You had said that it may be, because my recommendation, I don't know how the board feels about it, that if you're going to show a pathway on the plan, it should be shown to reflect that it's not going to result in runoff, which requires
Right.
significant more detail. Or you could just leave it off at this time, at point in time. So I'm asking, do you know which direction you want to go in there?
I have to believe that we're going to probably omit that.
Okay, that's all I'm asking. I just
Okay,
wanted,
because
because it was something that was
He'll
discussed.
reserve the right later on
yeah,
anyways.
right.
There's a lot of other issues he's got to deal
Sure.
with at this moment.
So do you want to request a continuance?
Yeah, I make a motion that.
Well, the applicant has to request a
Yeah,
continuance.
on the back of my client,
Good enough. Well,
We have
thank you
to
for your
vote on
time
it.
and
They
patience.
have to make a motion to accept the continuance.
Okay, I move that we accept the client's request for a continuance to 1/25/2018 at 6:12 PM.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, currently, 6:09.
Calling the 609 hearing for Wacoit Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve. This is Zero Beach, Willsworth Road. This is a request for permission to perform a salt marsh study. The owners of the record here is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the town of Mashpee. This is an NOI.
Thank you. For the record, my name is Jim Rossman. I'm the stewardship coordinator with Wacoit National Estuarine Research Reserve. And the project you have before you is a research project that we're proposing to undertake with 8 other research reserves around the country, looking at the use of thin layer placement of sediment on marsh surfaces to increase marsh resiliency. It's a practice that's starting to get a lot of attention around the country in the face of rising seas. If marshes are of enough value and a community wants to preserve a marsh, it's another potential use, beneficial use of dredge spoils. In this case, you're probably looking at some more rocky soils that maybe are not available for beach nourishment. But the idea is, well, research to look at the effectiveness of placing thin layer skimming sediment on top of marshes to raise their elevation, particularly when they're in a situation where they're increased pooling and panning from drowning marshes. So the proposal we have before you is kind of classic research proposal where there's 5 blocks and there's 5 different treatments, from control treatments to treatments with a wooden frame built around them but no sediment placed, and then 2 different sediment depths of 7 centimeters and 14 centimeters, and then additional frame where there's actually some biochar material. We'll be looking at the ability of incorporating increased carbon sequestration by incorporating some biochar material in the sediment placement, and what the value would that be for a large scale project. Obviously, this is a research project, so it's not, the plots are only 0.75 meters on the side, so we're not proposing, obviously, to do thin layer placement at the beach, at the marsh particularly, but to look at its usefulness and then track it over a 3-year period where we do vegetation analysis to see what recolonized the sediment, and were we able to recover some of the drowned marshes back to vegetation. And like I said, sorry, Drew, I didn't know what we have here. So in the plan and on the right-hand side, that's Sage Lot Pond in the dark, and the experiment site would be between the west side of Sage Lot and Willsworth Road in the salt marsh itself, but up against some of the pooling features. So it's kind of, I don't know if I have a pointer here.
Yeah, it's a yellow button right there. It's a laser pointer.
So what shows here in this, what's colored in the plan, these are existing pools. So the plot treatments are mostly on the edges of these pools, still on the marsh surface. And then over on here is kind of the staking thing, which is a 2x10 that's split in half. That creates the frame, and you put the sediment in. Like I said, it's 0.75 meters on the side. And the frame is, the only purpose of the frame is just to keep the sediment from, in place so it doesn't wash away.
I'm trying to locate this in my mind.
Yeah, so let's see.
It would be on the
let me
north
go to the,
side of Sage Lot Pond.
See this is the aerial image. So you've got Wacoit Bay on the left, that's
Yeah,
Sage Lot
okay,
Pond.
so, yeah.
So Wacoit Bay is over here.
So
I
here's
get into
Wacoit,
Sage
here's the
Lot
inlet to
Pond.
Sage Lot. This is the road down to Town Beach.
Yep. There's the parking lot right
Yeah,
there.
there's the parking lot right there.
Okay.
There's the road down to Town Beach. And then,
Right where I go shellfishing.
so yeah, it's hard to see Will's work on here, but Will's work kind of comes down like
Yep.
this. And then,
That's where you're
this
coming
is,
from?
Now, actually, so, well, that's where we come in. Currently, we have,
You've got a
there's a
test
little
stand.
access road down here that mosquito control put in years ago. It's been there for years. And we keep a skiff down here because we have one of our swamp stations out in
Don't
Sage.
you have another
There's an
platform there?
Well, over here is
Jim.
all the research.
You just need to microphone, so you can detach it if you'd like.
So sorry. So over here is the boardwalk to the blue carbon, the carbon research site over on this side. The only infrastructure associated with this is actually the frames. And besides monitoring, once we put the sediment in, the idea to put the sediment in is actually would come by boat with our Carolina skiffs. And we've kind of already tested this out. We would essentially put the sediment in like a punt, it's just a punt boat, and float it into these pools. So we've already tested this out. This actually works, and you can get to the plot locations that way. We wouldn't carry anything just too far to carry across the marsh and damage the marsh. So that would be the only. Bringing the sediment in is the challenge of it. Once you place the sediment, then it's just annual monitoring. After that, it's vegetative monitoring, and there's some cores that go into that too to look at what washes away. So that you put a feldspar marker, which is essentially some white granite, at the base elevation, and then you can dig down to that and see how much elevation did you gain or did you lose as the sediment settled. So.
I was curious what the feldspar was for.
Yeah, feldspar is just you can sprinkle it on marsh, and then as the sediment builds up on top, you can always go back down and find that spot.
Okay. So it's a marker.
It's a marker. It's a horizontal marker you put in the marsh. So that's what the feldspar is. But definitely the biggest challenge is to get the sediment in there. Although it's 200. I think the impact's about 211. It's in there. 250 square feet of marsh. It's strange. There was some question. You'll see two different numbers on there because some is actually under restoration where we're actually putting sediment down. But you got to remember, 2 out of 5 of the frames don't have any sediment in them. One has no frame at all. That's our pure control. And one is just the frame itself on the marsh to see is the wood frame itself having any effect, trapping more water or causing something that would be, so we can eliminate that as an effect. And then there's really the 2 different sediment depths, and then the one with the biochar addition. And then that's repeated in 5 blocks, just so we have repetition.
What is biochar? What is that?
Biochar is essentially it's charcoal, essentially.
Okay. Oh, okay.
It's biological material that's charred down, and we actually have to get the same material for all the research reserves around the country, so we're all adding the same. But, that's a little bit of a reach, but it's something that's been proposed by stakeholders. Well, is there a way to increase carbon sequestration of marshes by adding biochar? If you think back to the Amazon rainforest, this has been something that's been, practiced for centuries, and so it's something people want to look at. So it's a little bit of a flashy add-on, to be honest with you, but we're more interested in the sediment and its ability to revegetate.
Are you aware of any other areas of the country where thin layer placement is actually done?
So
on
Rhode
widespread?
Island is pretty active right now. So so Rhode Island, they're also getting a lot more marsh drowning. We're kind of not too far behind, and so the Chafee Wildlife Refuge has done it at scale down there. There's a marsh near Providence that has now done thin layer placement at scale. There's a marsh in Brewster they're actually proposing it for.
Did they do this kind of study?
But they haven't done this study, So the idea is to try to get ahead of, probably what eventually will come in front of all kinds of conservation commissions. If somebody says, well, why don't we raise the elevation of the marsh the next time we dredge? Well, would that work or not, and what impacts does that have on the vegetation? So that's what this study is meant to look at.
Good. Exciting.
So I'll take any questions. Well, you guys are already have questions, but any additional questions?
I was hoping you were going to say you got a little work road so you could get in there.
That's another issue. I did talk to one of our state reps today about that. So.
Good man.
So and on that, it always helps to have some pressure from the town on that too. So.
And I think I read in the description, maybe you could just clarify that if there is any kind of damage or adverse impact as a result of the study to the salt marsh, there will be mitigation to rectify.
Yeah, so that's written, again, so the protocols, we have to follow the same protocols throughout the country, so we're all doing the same study. And so the protocols are, obviously, all these are occurring in National Western Research Reserves, and everyone's saying, well, if there's an adverse impact, we, are willing to shut down the
Yeah.
study essentially and do
Right.
restoration.
Yeah.
I wouldn't expect it because of the scale and that we're going into essentially drowned sections of the marsh already, but,
Yeah, it's part of the
the
process.
frames start breaking down or, water
Right.
sediment starts.
Are there any questions from the audience?
Given that, I would move that we close an issue in regards to the application of Ocoit Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay.
Thank you.
I just had one more comment. The conservation commissions are listed, as a stakeholder in this, so we'd be more than willing to come back, annually and, share some results if you're
Yeah.
interested.
We would.
I would, yeah. Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Waterline Drive, so.
Opening the 612 hearing for Daniel A. and Linda G. Rand, 78 Waterline Drive South. Proposed construction of a covered porch on an existing dwelling.
Hello, for the record, my name is Ann McEntee. I'm representing Engineering Works and the applicant, Daniel Wren. If you look at your plans, the property is an approximately 15,000 square foot lot developed with a 4-bedroom house. The proposed project is a porch that occupies the footprint of an existing patio at the site. It is within a flood zone, the AD flood zone, but it is not in any other resource areas or wetlands on the site. Part of the site is in the riverfront area, but the proposed porch does not occupy that area.
So pretty simple
Yes, sir.
application compared to the previous two.
A little bit. A little bit.
Slightly less complicated. As she had mentioned already, it's a landlocked lot within land subject to coastal storm flow. As you can see from the photos, this is, sorry, the top one's a little shaded. That's a view from the road looking at the house. This is from the front yard looking at the area with the proposed enclosed porch, which is this part of the concrete patio right here. So this is all pre-disturbed, pre-developed area. So there's no removal of vegetation, which would be the only standard when it comes to flood zone lots that are landlocked. So I would recommend a negative determination.
Are there any comments from the audience?
Well, I would move it for a negative determination in regards to this application of Daniel A. and Linda G. Wren at 78 Waterline Drive South.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you. Opening the 615 hearing, John and Janet Pino, 43 Shoestring Bay Road. This is for a proposed tree removal and mitigation plan. RDA.
Good evening. Arlene Wilson, A.M. Wilson Associates, here for the Pinos. I will tell you before we start that I'm going to ask you for a continuance on this. There's been some confusion about the base plan for this job. You would think that after 35 years I would learn to second guess my clients all the time. But Mr. Pino had assured me that it was all right to use this plan, the base survey that had been done some time ago by Cape and Islands, and provided me with a copy, but apparently he had not obtained permission from Cape and Islands, and so the continuance is going to be to substitute a plan with a different base. But I would, before we start redoing these plans, like to ensure that the commission is not, is all right with the mitigation and the new tree placement, and to see whether you would like any additional shrubs or trees beyond what we've proposed. The project is to remove 4 quite tall oak trees immediately adjacent to the pool wall, and the client is quite concerned these have been limbed up quite a ways, and they're top-heavy in terms of the canopy. They blow over the pool toward the house. He's quite concerned that they're going to be a problem in a storm soon, and wants to be proactive. So we're showing the removal of those 4 trees, replacement with different but native species that are somewhat shorter, have wildlife food sources associated with them. One would be moved from the upper limit of your 100-foot buffer to the top of the coastal bank, down immediately adjacent to the coastal bank where there isn't so much tree canopy, and then also to add 5 shrubs nearer to the constructed boardwalk that runs down the slope.
I mean, to me, the mitigation looks good. They will require an alternate plan because this plan doesn't have permission to be used before the commission. So the one thing that I did want to find out if it would be a possibility, because when it comes to tree removal where, it's an opinion of the homeowner that they're a hazard, the commission has almost every time required the input report of a certified arborist to take a look at those trees to determine whether pruning may be able to alleviate the hazard as opposed to outright cutting and removal of, and they're all mature trees. There's one that I see that is smaller than the others, which looks like its health is deteriorating. But again, I'm not a certified arborist, but that has been the commission's protocol when it comes to removal of trees whose health may or may not be in question, or if there's a concern about their proximity to structure of the home, that arborist report would reflect that based on their experience.
We do commonly allow for really clear and obvious hazards. If a tree is rotting, starting to go or something. But in the case of apparently healthy, mature trees, we'd really rather have an arborist tell us if there's a real problem. It's sad when trees like that have to be removed. But we don't want to see it done unnecessarily.
I understand. So if we're going to do that, rather than continue to your next meeting, if we could do it to the meeting following that,
Sure.
give us time to
Yeah.
coordinate and hire somebody and get a report in.
Sure.
Do we have a time for that?
The next meeting, not January 25th, would be February 8th, and 6 p.m. would be the time slot. Oh, is that what you were asking? I'm sorry.
No, that is what I'm asking, but I didn't realize it was the 8th, and I've got to be in Boston that
Oh,
night. So
So we'll look at
I
it.
guess we're going to do one more after that.
February 22nd would be the
That's fine.
next one.
I'm sorry.
No problem.
Also be at 6, I assume?
What's that? At 6 p.m., yes. Yeah.
Do I hear a motion?
Make a motion that we continue the hearing for this project until February 22nd at 6 p.m.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
We
Aye.
need to have it be clear that the request is that by the applicant.
Yes, if you could just reiterate, that's your request to have it continue.
Yes, that is my request to have.
Thank you.
We're not proposing it. It's.
Yeah, it's
I
coming
thought she
from-
said it already, so,
Yeah,
Well,
just to make sure.
okay.
We're just giving her
Would you like to
request.
restate your
Sure, make a motion to continue this hearing till February 22nd at 6 p.m. based on the applicant's request. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yep.
I think you got it.
Thank you.
Okay.
We got a second.
We
you
do
want
have,
a second?
we do have a vote.
Okay, we have a vote. Okay, so we're
Just
just clarifying.
clarifying.
Just
Say that,
clarifying
yeah.
what-
Okay.
Okay, sounds good to me.
See you in February.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're done. Oh, we gotta,
This-
just gotta,
calling
too.
the 6:18 hearing. Daniel E. Masters, trustee, 49 Palmer Road. This is for proposed construction of a single-family dwelling, garage, septic system upgrade, and landscaping hardscaping. It's an NOI. We have a request from the applicant to continue this hearing till January 25th at 6:06 PM. Do I hear a motion?
Yeah.
Well, I guess we,
If there are any questions or comments from the audience,
I have questions on the butter of that
Well,
property.
If you have input about the project itself, it's been requested to be continued, so it's not to be deliberated tonight. So
Okay.
you can attend the next hearing.
When is that again?
That's gonna be January 25th, and it'll be at 6:06 PM. If there any reason you can't attend the hearing, you're more than welcome to submit comments in writing.
Does he get to clear that lot before that?
We can't really discuss anything about it. They've requested a continuance.
you're welcome to.
But you can come in and view the plans. The reason they continued is because they submitted revised plans inside of 5 days of the hearing, which isn't automatic grounds for continuance. It has to be in our office for 5 days for public viewing and review. So that's why it was continued, because we received the plans just yesterday.
Okay.
So that's why it's really for the benefit of abutters and those who are concerned.
So I can come and see the plans?
You can come see the plans anytime during normal working hours, yep.
Yeah, and our staff will try to help you with any questions. you
Yeah,
may
we'll
have
be
about-
glad to go over
About the
any questions you
procedures
have.
or any of that
So
sort of
would
thing.
you want any information about that I could leave with you? Or-
You could leave it with me now if you'd like, and then you can schedule a time to come in and speak to me about it, or review the plans.
Actually, my husband sent me, he's sick, so I was the messenger.
we will not shoot the messenger.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This is a plan that's been approved for a long time. They're just making modifications to an approved plan, right? They haven't broken ground and done anything.
No.
I just happened to be by, yeah, okay, so. I haven't noticed that.
So unless my memory is failing, we haven't actually had a motion for this yet.
Did you make a motion for the continuance
Is
yet?
there a motion?
Sure, I'll make a motion to continue the hearing for Daniel E. Masters at 49 Palmer Road to, is it the 25th, is it,
Yep.
Drew?
6:06 PM.
6:06.
January 25th
The
at 6:06
applicant's
PM.
request.
At the applicant's request.
I thought we were going home.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Take a final, all in favor?
Aye.
All?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes.
So the motion is passed.
Next.
You want me to step in for?
Opening these, I didn't realize we had another hearing, sorry.
Yeah, I missed that.
Opening the 621 hearing, Patricia A. Connolly, flies the concept Alley Road. This is for the proposed construction of a detached garage, septic system upgrade, tree removal, and mitigation planting. This is an NOI.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the record. Pardon me, Matt Costa, Cape and Islands Engineering. We're here tonight before you under a notice of intent application to construct a detached garage and the associated mitigation with it. The garage is triggering the waiver requirement, so it does require mitigation under that waiver requirement standard. So this project, as you saw from the overhead, is on this unique little piece of property right here. As you drive over the culvert, thank you, coming towards Wisconsin Island Boatyard down here, on your right, we've got this little parcel. It's actually two parcels combined as one, and then the man-made canal that runs through and feeds this area over here. The resource areas for this project include land under the ocean, land containing shellfish, coastal beach, coastal bank, and then across the street, we're bordered both sides. Across the street, we also have BVW and salt marsh on that side and land under the water as well. So see setbacks are coming from both sides of the street. To the plan. So the proposal, I did a little blow up in the right side of the plan for you. Trying to fit everything on here at 30 scale is tricky. But the proposal here is the detached garage in this location. In this location, there's an existing shed, and it's an old previously disturbed buffer zone area. This garage is going to be situated at the end of the existing driveway, and we located it so that the garage would be outside of the velocity zone. I mentioned that new resource areas included coastal bank. We delineated that coastal bank by the slope criteria, and you'll see immediately adjacent to the garage is the coastal bank coming through here, then ends and picks up again, and then wraps around the property. If you look at the detail, you can see closer, we have the existing shed, and we have a series of cedar trees in here. We're proposing to remove the shed, remove the cedar trees, and construct the garage. We're not proposing any alterations to the existing structure. In addition to the proposal of the detached garage, we're also proposing to install a new 4-bedroom Title V system in this area out here. We did review this with the Board of Health ahead of time. I was working with Glenn Harrington while I was doing the design, and we did meet the setback requirements off of all of the adjacent wetlands with respect to Board of Health requirements. The proposed garage will have living space above it, and it will be tied into the existing septic system. The garage is situated very close to the top of the coastal bank, so this small garage, when we look at your waiver requirements and going in those 5-foot intervals, there is a lot of mitigation that is required. Now, we hit the pause button for a second. Now, when we talk about the waiver, there's 3 specific criteria we're supposed to review, and we outline these in our narrative as we usually do. The first is what degree are we asking to waive this? What's the extent? It's pretty substantial because we are close to the coastal bank. The impact, however, the next criteria is rather modest because it's rather low because this is previously a disturbed area, and there is a structure in that area now, albeit a shed. There's actually a row of old cobblestones that are in here right at the top of the bank. This area is actually overgrown over the years. Those cedar trees have grown up. They've grown very tight to the shed. So it hasn't been maintained over the years. The third criteria is what are we doing to balance this out? What is the proposed mitigation? So we always try to look at our projects as a balance between what's being requested, what's being proposed for mitigation, so that we have a net benefit to the environment. And what we're proposing is to replant the 7 cedar trees with a different species because talking with Drew, learned that nursery cedars are kind of like the country bumpkins, and when they come out to coastal areas like this, they don't last very well. They actually will get beat up pretty good. So because this is a very high, a lot of exposure in this area, we're proposing to plant Japanese black pine trees because they're a much hardier tree and they will be able to withstand this type of climate. We're also proposing a dense understory of plantings that meet the requirements for the mitigation calculations, or they meet your mitigation requirements by supplying the number or area of mitigation plantings. You'll see in the plan, in the mitigation calculation notes, we have total area of mitigation plantings required, 1,601 square feet, 1,601.5. We're proposing 1,610 square feet, so we're proposing actually slightly more than what is required. So to the extent that we're asking for the waiver, it does appear to be substantial. because the coastal bank is so close, but it is a previously disturbed area, and we are meeting the full extent plus a little bit extra of the required mitigation. The also a benefit will be the upgrade of the septic system, because here is the septic system right now. It's right in the backyard. And we'll be moving it up front, further away from the wetlands, and with a new Title V design raising it above groundwater. So there will be overall a net environmental benefit for when this project is complete. One thing I did want to point out is that we are here tonight understanding we do have to go to zoning board of appeals because we are pushing that garage out of the velocity zone, and we were not able to meet the setback to the street. That is really not, it's just sort of FYI information. So really that's it in a nutshell. We believe that this project does meet the performance standards, and it did meet the spirit of the waiver requirements, and it is worthy of you granting that waiver. And we have articulated all of this in our narrative, and we respectfully request that you issue an order of conditions. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Out of curiosity,
Oh, go ahead.
the location of the new plantings, I'm just wondering, we've got a lot of land to work with, yet you've clustered into that one zone very close to the home.
Well, we kind of don't have a lot of land. Can you flip back to the aerial? What we really have is just this backyard area, right around the house.
Okay, and then,
That's
there's
it.
another lot on that
Everything
point?
else over here is more or less natural,
Uh-huh.
and there would be not much of a benefit to planting over here.
Okay.
Obviously, it would be
Yeah,
very
you
open.
can't see the trees. You can see the trees here now. I read,
Yeah,
it's wrong.
I mean,
So you're curving around those trees that are there right now?
sorry?
You're curving the planting around the trees that are there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're supplementing this.
Yeah.
So that's actually, if you look at the plan, it's elevated. So that's the highest point on the lot.
Yeah.
So we're planting on the back side of it.
Okay.
So there's gonna be some protection for those plants that we put in. We don't wanna put plants in and have them die, then there's certificate of compliance issues. So if we strategically located them along that existing buffer that's there, so we're actually enhancing the buffer. We're putting them on the backside so they're not getting blasted. And that is within lawn area, so there is the reduction of lawn area that's also occurring there. So that is the benefit that we strive for.
Good, thank you.
I was looking at one of the pictures, looks like there's a lot of timbers. Is there a timber walkway down by, there's a rowboat in the
Yeah,
picture,
I was
down
gonna
to
ask
that?
if there's any violations of the
Over here?
wetlands. Yeah, that could be.
Yeah, it looks like there's a timber walkway with the rowboats to
I
it.
thought I saw timber boards that were there.
Yeah.
They were there one trip, they weren't there another trip.
The picture that was included here
It didn't
shows.
seem like a.
Shows like they were
Like-
buried into the soil or something like that.
Yeah, page 22.
Two.
22 of 25 shows, boards laying there, skips laying on the vegetated areas. I was just looking and wondering if there's any need to fixing that, so to speak.
We'd be happy to look at that.
That's
The
up to-
boards, I did see go away.
Yeah, I didn't see them out there when I was
Yeah,
there.
when
I mean,
we
the
go to a
the
site,
boat and the skiff, there were some other things on site that the homeowner's gonna have to be made aware of.
or
such as
could
the
be
boat.
added in
Yeah.
condition, so you know.
The boat should be
Slow
removed
up
off
this,
natural
clean up that,
vegetation.
it's-
Mhm.
Actually, the boat will probably be in the garage now.
Yeah, exactly.
Did have a question on the proposed, the additional living space. Board of Health says the number of bedrooms are being reviewed. Was there any thought to adding living space onto the home as opposed to above the garage? And the reason I'm asking about that is because the garage is in very close proximity to the coastal bank. It does involve the removal of cedar trees that are in the driveway layout, and the height of the garage could possibly affect even more trees that are on the coastal bank or even closer to the coastal bank. So I'm wondering if there was any thought given to that, because I've seen many times when structures are proposed, whether it's the excavation for the foundation or the height of it, that more trees end up getting affected than what's shown on the plan. So I'm wondering if that was taken into consideration, why the living space above the garage as opposed to the home itself.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we looked at it. The primary goal was to just modify the house. House is in the velocity zone. So we're bound to a 50% improvement rule, and we can't basically do anything to the structure without bringing it totally up to code, which would be jacking it up in the air, putting it on piles, tearing it down, rebuilding it on piles. And we can't even attach the garage to the house, because as soon as the garage gets attached to the house, it pulls the house in that 50% improvement category with it. So we have to have a detached structure. We can't really do much with the house. The house is a very small structure, has minimal value to it. I did talk to Board of Health today. They are okay with the number of bedrooms. They're not going to do an inspection on it. Glenn just looked at the size of the house and said, yeah, so we're all right for the number of bedrooms. So we wanted to do that, but it's not possible. In this way, it actually was sort of serendipitous where he was able to get some garage space, and in sort of going through the decision-making process, realized that is a benefit, the garage space, and that just having some extra space above that garage made them happy enough that they were to go with that.
And I see 7 cedar trees proposed to be removed, but the 2 that are, I'm going to go to the other. These ones that are outside the footprint of the garage, what's the need to remove those? There's 2, possibly even 3 that I count that are not within the proposed footprints of the garage, that are in and around the shed area. What's the reason for their removal?
I just think over construction, I mean, I believe that to be within 10 feet of that garage,
Okay.
I think that
You're going to anticipate that they're going to be impacted by.
they're going to be impacted. They are. Now, the question is could we, yeah, we could. And you can build tunnels under cities. You can save a couple of trees next to the garage. If that is something you want us to do, we could make some extra efforts to save a couple of those trees. I see that they would be impacted otherwise without some really careful efforts to protect them. So I just simply called them to be removed and replanted.
Okay.
That was the rationale.
We could condition that they're like wood board strapping to be put around the trees if there's in close proximity to construction equipment, just to an attempt to protect them. But if they are damaged, then that I think a condition put in place. What concerns me about the garage is that the combination of the excavation for the floor and the height of the garage is going to impact even more cedar trees. They're small trees. Let me just show you the picture.
Can they be relocated, those cedar trees?
I don't know. I think they're probably at
They're really not
a growth stage.
specimens,
Yeah.
Because see right there's a classic near the shed.
Oh, okay.
Close.
And then when the cedars bunch up, if you go and you separate them, you have half
Yeah.
a cedar.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I'm trying to find it's the bottom right photo to the right of that. That stake is the corner of garage that you see on the bottom right, the pink flag right there. So that's going to be where the excavation is, and the trees that you see to the right are kind of leaning up in the direction of the garage. So depending on the garage height, they're going to be in such close proximity, they're going to be whacking up against the side. And as I've seen many times, once a construction project is finished, the homeowner looks at the vegetation that's remaining that's close and says, can we get rid of these? Because they're smacking up against the side of my brand new garage or house.
They won't be able to construct it. They need 5 feet or
Right.
6
Right.
feet of space to
So
construct it.
my suggestion would be to add in a condition for that contingency if there is excess removal of vegetation, that the commission be notified about it first before the excavation happens, or during, if it turns out that more trees are to be removed than is anticipated, that we put a condition in to notify us ahead of time. and just to be kind of, closely monitor that area, because it is, it's a revetment protected channel, so that's, the coastal bank is not a sediment source, so it's not, the performance standards are really for storm damage prevention, a vertical face for storm damage prevention. That's the primary function of the bank. But I just want, because it is in such close proximity to the coastal bank, I just want to make sure that that area gets monitored very closely when it comes to construction, because it's real close. And there's a lot going on there, the vertical structure and excavation for the floor. So.
And we are calling for the limit of work to be bent around the garage area.
Yeah.
And then that, you'll see, we're only allowing for a very narrow path around the garage when we're done, and some area within the limit of work to be replanted, and that's not counted for mitigation.
Where's the pathway on the?
So if you look on the key, the garage layout detail,
Mhm.
you'll see an area to be replanted with native species after construction.
Yep.
Within the limit of work there.
Yeah.
So that's the idea, is that any construction activity going on around the garage, that area gets replanted there.
Okay.
In that, they just have enough room to get around the garage. So we could do the same thing with.
I may like to
with
see
any
some.
trees that are there. Actually,
Yeah.
frankly, I should have shown the trees here.
Yeah.
And I'll add that to the plan.
I may like to see more than just grasses, what you have slated for that area, to combine some shrubs in there too, not just
I
grasses.
just said native species.
Yeah,
I didn't
yeah.
call out.
Oh, I thought
specific
I had read that it was mostly native grasses, but I could be mistaken, maybe that was a different mitigation area.
Bayberry.
Yeah, Bayberry would survive fine.
Yeah,
Yeah, you
Yeah.
got 26 of them called out here.
That's in the front.
That's in the, that's in the,
Okay.
Plenty 1 and 2, yeah.
Yeah, that's on the coastal things.
Yeah, but just add in on
yeah.
that area, say, add the notes and say what you're gonna plant there. That'd be,
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
We could, and I have stated on my planting notes that any changes in species get reviewed with the
Yeah.
administrator. So we try to keep people on track for not talking the plans, so I make sure it's all right.
I always just get a little bit nervous when it's in real close proximity to a resource area.
Well, that's why we're here,
Yeah.
just to make sure that things go
Yeah.
on our plan well.
Matt, one just quick question, just for curiosity's sake. The garage looks like it's within a foot of the edge of the bulkhead. How are they gonna use that bulkhead?
I think they're actually gonna,
It's more for curiosity's sake.
I think he's gonna get rid of the bulkhead.
Oh, okay.
That's gonna happen. They're gonna sort of, the builder I talked to, they're gonna figure their way through whether they can actually use that bulkhead or not in the end. My guess is probably gonna be history for the bulkhead.
Yeah, because I don't know how you can dig for a foundation.
Yeah, it would have,
Foot,
the piece would have to come off and they'd have to put it
Yeah,
back on. And we'll see what happens, but bulkhead will probably end up going away.
Any other questions? Mr. Chairman?
So I would like to hear a motion which references the suggested.
Well, I would move that we close an issue in regards to the application of Patricia Connolly, 5 Secaucet Island Road.
You did have, you want to suggest an additional?
With the conditions that have been described in the minutes of this meeting.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you. Just a quick note on another matter. I will never give anyone permission to draw on our plans and let them submit them to you. I'll never give anybody permission to take our plans and cut the border, the title block off, cut my stamp off, put it on their plan, copy it, and submit it to you as their own work. I have major issue with that. So if you ever see a plan that looks like mine, or it's Cape and Islands, and it's hand drawn on, we did not authorize that. And I just want you all to be aware of that.
Point is taken.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. To, pass around the permits to be signed. I'll make sure I'm not giving you something that.
You, thanks, Mark, Ben. Oh, I got one, thank you.
quorum for approving?
We don't have a quorum, so minutes will have to be tabled for January 25th.
Do you need anything on the certificate of compliance, or you need that from previous?
No issues, they all passed
All passed,
inspection,
okay.
so. I'm sorry, no, they didn't, that's why one was missing. 4 Waterline Drive North, this was a pool patio that was approved by the commission, and mitigation, this was actually the one that the mitigation exceeded the amount of space on the lot, so that through town council's review, we authorized a monetary donation equivalent of the price of the missing, unavailable mitigation to be donated to the shellfish propagation program for the town. So that was done. However, the mitigation that was required was not put in to its fullest when I did the inspection. So there's still more mitigation that needs to be done, so it did not pass inspection. That's 4 Waterline Drive North. The other two, 31 James Circle and 28 Elliott Road, both passed. So, shall I wait till Brad gets back? There's a couple of updates briefly as you guys are signing. But I'll wait till Brad gets back. John Adams, by the way, you see him on the pre and post hearing agenda, presentation on guided outdoor adventure. He's one of our land stewards, and he wasn't able to come tonight, so you'll see that in a future meeting. But I just wanted to give a quick update on the Air Force Civil Engineering Center and where we're at with the funding for the Upper Quashnet. It's not good news, unfortunately. I spoke with Rose Forbes from the Air Force Civil Engineer Center. I'll preface this by saying that the Civil Engineer Center is essentially on our side. They know that the berm failure impacted the Quashnet River, and they're responsible for fixing it. Having said that, the contracting center for the Air Force, when they submitted this funding for ultimate approval by the Air Force, ran into a snag, and their legal team or legal representative at the contracting center doesn't see eye to eye with the Air Force Civil Engineer Center that this restoration deserves this kind of funding or qualifies for this type of funding. So I have yet to speak with Rose directly over this, but she did indicate that she's sending, there's Jonathan Davies, who works for Civil Engineer Center, is going down to Houston to the contracting center and trying to work things out with whatever concerns they have. I don't know specifically what concerns they have. What I do know is that we have signed documentation from the Air Force, signed by the Board of Selectmen and the Conservation Commission back when this project was approved. And part of this agreement was that the Air Force is responsible in the event of a berm failure or subsidence. It's pretty crystal clear. But I do feel that this may ultimately result in legal action on part of the town if it's not resolved soon, because it's already taken entirely too long, and it just keeps hitting a snag. So I think that might be an inevitability, unfortunately. But we'll see how it plays out. So 2 weeks from now, they're going to have someone go down and try to work things out, and I'll have a report for everybody once we get word back. It's frustrating to wait this long to, find out about funding, which they were on the verge of cutting us a check for. I mean, literally.
That's too bad.
Yeah. So what you see up on the screen, this is a trip that I made out to you've probably read about this in the papers, the Coonamessett River restoration in Falmouth. These are just some pictures of some of the restoration work that's taken place in one of the 3 bogs. It's 3 different bog complexes where the river is being restored, and in some cases where it takes a straight path, it's now taking a more sinuous path to mimic more natural river conditions. This is a very large project, much larger than what we're looking at the Upper Quashnet. But as far as the setting, it's an abandoned cranberry bog, a series of abandoned cranberry bogs that are being, where the Coonamessett River runs through all of them. And they are restoring the river for not only fish passage, but also to restore cold water fishery habitat for brook trout. So the setting is very similar to what the Upper Quashnet project is all about. It was really the thing I took away from this, and you can see in the top left is probably the best illustration of it. is the amount of bioengineering that goes into reestablishing and creating these riverbanks. These are 20 to 25 foot long tree stumps, or sections of trees that are just hammered into the ground to anchor other large pieces of wood that are injected 10 to 12 feet underground with root stumps sticking out of the sides, which you can see here along this section of river channel. So the amount of bioengineering that goes into reestablishing these riverfronts, establishing new riverbank or enhancing existing riverbank is really amazing to see it up close and personal. You get a real appreciation for just how much engineering is involved with projects like this and how substantial it is. A lot of this wood was sourced locally from growth on the bog itself. Other wood was stockpiled from local landscapers and arborists and tree cutting companies that the wood was stockpiled on site.
Tree, what species is it?
Mostly pine, but a lot of hardwoods too.
Yeah.
But yeah, they all came from like local tree companies or some of the finer materials like the root wads and the thinner branches. That kind of woody material came from what was growing on the bog itself, because outside of the river channel that they created, they also created pit and mound habitat on the bog surface. So they excavated out the top where the vines were growing and the sand layers that were added on over the years when the bog was cultivated. All that's been stripped away, so about 2 or 3 feet of material. You can imagine how much fill they had to get rid of, they stored it on site, but how much fill was removed from the bog surface just to turn this into essentially a floodplain. And it's going to accommodate some new wetland plantings. So the area is going to look drastically different from what you see. This whole area here used to be all cranberry bog with the vines and then some emergent successional growth of willows and pines. And now it's just been entirely stripped. And you'll see all new plantings along here throughout the whole bog complex, along with some natural regrowth. But the one thing they want to monitor is that gray willow, which is an invasive, doesn't start to take a foothold. So it's not all going to be natural regrowth. There will be a lot of native plantings that will be going in. But if you ever have a chance, if anyone's ever interested in looking at this site, very similar to Eel River and Plymouth as well, they're not doing the white cedar planting at this site. This is going to be more red maple and.
Where is this?
So Coonamessett, it's off John Parker Road in Falmouth, which comes right off of 28, and it's probably like maybe a mile and a half off of 28 as you're heading towards North Falmouth, I think.
Yeah, no, that's still East Falmouth.
It is still East Falmouth.
Valley
Yeah.
is still East Falmouth.
That's right, it's East Falmouth. So, but I can. Mark Kasperzik is the agent for Falmouth, and he said, if any of you are interested in going out for a site visit, they meet every Wednesday. They have a meeting of all the contractors and the consultants and the staff from the town, and then they go out and start working. So
Where's the funding?
the funding comes, it's multiple sources of funding. Division of Ecological Restoration for the state of Massachusetts. I think some Trout Unlimited funding, Ducks Unlimited, Nature Conservancy. There's a bunch of different funding sources that the town is using to get combined to pay for all of this. So
Falmouth has deep pockets in their conservation area as well.
yeah.
I mean, the funding for.
I think the 300 committee has also donated some money to this.
Every once in a while, I'll be looking at obituaries, to see whether I should continue on for the day. And in there, you'll see that somebody has passed, and they have suggested that 300 is the place that the money should
Yeah.
go. So
They're a big land trust in fact, they got a lot of land now. But this is really, it's pretty fascinating stuff to watch, particularly to watch the work in action, and you just see it. And I had actually wondered about these large tree stumps sticking out of the ground like that. I was saying, is that the way it's going to stay? And what it's anticipated to happen, because that just looks like almost like an alien landscape. It doesn't look natural at all. Over time, through the seasons, those stumps are going to gradually start to lower, and they will just incorporate themselves into the riverbank over time. So that's kind of what's expected to happen. And it's really cool to see it at the beginning stage like this. And if you ever want to see a finished product, Red Brook, the Theodore Lyman Reserve, which is a trustees of reservation property over in Bourndale, used this very similar setting, and you can see what the banks look like now that it's been fully revegetated and the project's been done for a few years now. And what it looks like it was always there. You would never know that there was any excavation or any sort of planting or anything. It just looks 100% natural. And Eel River is kind of like getting there, but Lyman is like complete, and years have gone by now, and regrowth has taken hold, and it's just amazing how natural it looks. Like you walk in there and you would think, wow, this is actually a project. This looks like it's been there for hundreds of years. So it's really
I just pulled in
fascinating.
a couple of weeks ago, and just, got out, looked around a little bit.
Yeah.
I was going down that way to get to the shopping area. And
Oh yeah,
it's really starting to settle in.
yeah, yeah.
Looked like a moonscape when we were there.
So if anyone wants to get a tour, just contact me and I'll be happy to arrange it. It's really worth checking out. Really cool stuff. So
It almost looks like it's a navigable stream.
I wouldn't recommend walking over it after this weekend because you'll
Yeah.
probably sink down about 5-6 feet into the pockets. That's it.